Hello and welcome to Startup Grind. It is Thursday, August 26th, and I'm your host, Katie Zeppieri. I'm so excited to be with you this morning for a really powerful fireside chat that we have ahead of us here. This event I always look forward to. I think these are such great opportunities to come together, to hear stories from entrepreneurs who have built successful companies, are continuing to bring them to the next level, and really getting that behind the scenes insight into their process. Like, when do you get those opportunities to ask kind of those inside questions, learn the backstory, ask the tough stuff? Welcome everyone. I see you in the chat here. Say hi. Let us know where you're from. Let us know your company. If you're an entrepreneur, let's take a moment. Everybody can say hi in the chat. I really like to encourage that conversation. I mean, this is interactive. I know it's virtual, but the way that I feel like I'm talking to people is by having you interact in the chat bar over here as well. And so, yeah, comments, questions throughout today's conversation, absolutely welcome. And if I don't get to your question right away, just know that I will circle back to it. We will make sure we get your questions answered. That's awesome. So welcome. And Spark Center, which I'm really proud to be a client of, is hosting this incredible Startup Grind series in partnership with Launch Lab, a fellow regional innovation center in Kingston. And so I want to shout out a couple of Spark Center's elite partners who help make events like this possible. MNP's Assurance and Accounting Services, Bearskin and Par LLP, Durham Recruiting, Roughly Insurance, Finance Without Borders, and Suresh Law Professional Corporation. So huge shout out and thank you to our partners. Shout out to everyone for being here today. Awesome. I see some people introducing themselves. Hi, Donald. Nice to have you here. Trenton, amazing. Kathy, hi. Natalie, hi. Awesome. Thank you so much. So please keep that interaction coming and keep those questions coming. So today's guest, I mean, I have been, observing and following her work for some time now. I knew a really good friend of mine worked with Katherine and one of her previous companies. And so I got to hear the inside scoop. Here's this young, up and coming entrepreneur building big things. And I'm just so excited to have the opportunity to host this chat, because I think you're all in for a treat. We're going to get some insight into the life of a serial entrepreneur and someone who is essentially changing an entire category of product. So I'd love to take a moment and introduce today's guest, who is none other than Katherine Homuth. Katherine is a serial entrepreneur, angel investor, and the founder and inventor of Sheertex, the world's strongest sheer tights and one of Time Magazine's best inventions. She's the author of O'Reilly's book, Funded, The Entrepreneur's Guide to Raising Your First Round. Prior to leading Sheertex, Katherine founded ShopLocket, acquired in 2014 by PCH and Female Funders, an online destination dedicated to inspiring and educating the next generation of female angels. Katherine has been named one of the women to watch in wearables, one of Canada's top 100 most powerful women, Forbes 30 under 30, Canada's 40 under 40, wow, and one of Flair's 60 under 30. She has been quoted in the New York Times on fashion tech and was interviewed for the Oprah Winfrey Network. I could go on, but please help me welcome Katherine.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
I love, is that actually a fireplace behind you, Katherine?
This is actually a fireplace. I am up in the woods right now.
This is a real fireside chat. I love that. I mean, so grateful and excited that you're here for this chat, because as I was mentioning, like, I mean, I've heard about you and I've heard about your work for some time, but to see even in the last 5 years how much your own career and how much your business has grown and evolved is phenomenal. And so the people joining us today, I see lots of people hi there in the comments, who are fellow entrepreneurs, who are perhaps investors in the comments, community organizers supporting innovation across Ontario and beyond. So we have like a wide mix of people joining us today. And this is a chance to really dive in and learn more about how you got to where you are today, and also what's next for you. So I always love to start by going backwards. And so I think one of the coolest things to know about somebody is, who were you, Katherine, as a child? What did you want to be when you grew up?
Well, in sort of my earliest childhood, I think I want to be an event planner. That was the thing that made me really excited. I liked organizing for other people, but that was pretty early. That would have been when I was like 10 or 11. And it was quite early in life that I started to realize that the people that I admired most had one thing in common. They had built something. And as a really young child, it was Oprah Winfrey, it was Richard Branson, and these big personalities that I just gravitated to. But I realized that it was that they had really started from nothing and built up their own careers. That was really inspirational to me. And I didn't even know the word entrepreneur. I didn't really understand business or what they had built, but I started to read biographies. I started to become kind of obsessed with learning about these people. And I didn't really know how to make the crossover, though. And I ended up thinking I was going to go into finance, because finance felt adjacent to starting businesses, and maybe that made sense. I remember I was maybe in grade 10 and I was doing really well in science class. And I remember walking in at the end of the year and telling my teacher I was dropping all of my science classes, and they were really, really disappointed. And I was like, but I'm going to start a company. I'm going to go into business. I don't need any of these to get into university. So I was just so laser focused. I thought business school meant starting businesses, meant going on this track. And I was pretty sorely disappointed, I'd say, on the first day of business school, walking in and realizing as they went around the room that everyone else wanted to be an accountant, or they wanted to go into management consulting. And I was like, this is not what I thought this first day of school was going to be. So I started going to events like this. I started surrounding myself as much as possible with other people that seemed closer to the world I wanted to be a part of. And I planned conferences, I planned business plan competitions. I really had no idea how to actually cross over to the starting side. I registered lots of businesses that went nowhere, but I think my strategy was get as close to the sun as possible. And maybe some of it will rub up on me.
I love that. That's interesting. So as you were reading and learning and following, say, people like Richard Branson and Oprah Winfrey, what were some of the sort of traits that you found that were consistent across all of the people that you admired?
Yeah, I think that it was hard work that was what actually made them successful. And that it was these long careers where they had kind of kept moving to the next level in their career. I found it a lot harder to relate to people that, Zuckerberg, for example. I found it a lot harder to relate to, just creating this thing and it worked, and, you just go and it takes off. I didn't come from a lot of money. I didn't have a lot of connections. I felt that if there was a way that I could follow a path where it was hard work, that was what was going to get me there. That was probably the path I needed to take. And I have later in my career started to realize that I think my philosophy aligns very much with what Dalton, one of the partners of Y Combinator, calls creating a surface area for luck. I don't feel like a lucky person. I don't feel like someone that has, brilliant ideas, but I do so many things and I get so many shots on net that something is bound to hit. And I think that has been really a common theme through my childhood into, when I was hosting all of those events and meeting all of those people and consulting for a million companies. It was just a lot of shots on net to try to bump into the right people, do the right work, discover the right thing. But yeah, lots and lots and lots of surface area for luck.
I think that quote is brilliant. I mean, I usually say it, I think, in a fluffier way. I've heard like the, opportunity dances with those who are on the dance floor. Like I'm all about it. But I love that, creating surface area for luck, putting yourself in a position for great things to come your way. And it feels like something in you sort of realized that at maybe a young age. Like it was like, I admire people like this. I'm going to start putting myself in front of and surround myself with people like this, because I know that this is going to kind of direct me the right way. Is there a moment or maybe like a first example of you remembering like consciously, okay, I'm going to attend this event, or I'm going to create this event? Take us to like that first sort of conscious memory that you have of like, let's put myself out there.
Yeah, I was always the type of person that was trying new things, but I think that, and my parents probably instilled it in me, they were always putting us in every sport, everything. Like you were just always doing, if you had an idea, they would like help support my sister and I in going to try that. But as it first related to business, I was in a high school club, maybe like a leadership club, I can't remember, but I joined every club. Like I was part of all of the clubs. And this particular one talked about a conference happening downtown Toronto, and downtown Toronto, even though I live in Mississauga, was like a foreign place. This was far and exotic. And they were doing Impact Entrepreneurship Conference. The conference doesn't happen anymore, but this had happened for a couple years at the time. I think it might have been 2006 or 2007, maybe 2007 at the time. And they were letting high school students go for the very first time. And I thought this was really interesting. So I went down, and at that event, like it felt like freedom, because I had like gone downtown by myself I was like 16, and I was in this whole other world. And I met, I think it was at the time, it was Craig Kielberger. There were a whole bunch of tech entrepreneurs, like software entrepreneurs. And that was like a world I just knew nothing about. I did not understand the web really beyond, what I did in my day-to-day life. And I realized in that event that it was tech entrepreneurs that actually had this DNA that I'd been looking for. This DNA around like trying things and moving quickly. And that to me was intoxicating. And I joined Impact, which was this student group that was putting on this event after that event as a high school student. And I think I planned the 2008 version of that conference. I chaired the conference just as I was like coming into, I think, my first year of university. So it must have been 2006 that I went to the first one, and then I chaired it in 2008. And I started planning business plan competitions in my first year at Schulich. And that was a big turning point for me, because it took me from being kind of lost. And, I think I was in like the Mississauga Arts Council. I was in every student group. I was just, doing everything. And this event, found a bunch of people that were very like-minded. And then through that, I started to meet a bunch of people that went to the University of Waterloo. And Waterloo was way more interesting than Schulich. And I started to drive down to Waterloo probably every week throughout university. And I would go to their student events because they were more interesting. And I would hang out with people that were going through engineering school. And I just got closer and closer to this like DNA of people that were talking about and doing the things that I found really exciting. And at that time, I started to do social media consulting, which is probably the only thing that anyone would trust an 18-year-old to do. And I was doing this for a few larger companies. One of them was the Lunch Lady Group, which does a whole bunch of school lunches across Canada. And Ruthie Bird, who's the entrepreneur behind the Lunch Lady, was so incredible to me. I probably spent, a few days a week with Ruthie for a year or two, watching how she ran the business, how she grew it, how she ran her team. And it wasn't in the tech world, but I had that world somewhere else. She was kind of the first real business with real employees and real responsibility that I spent a lot of time with. And I stopped working with the Lunch Lady just as I finished school. And I was pretty disappointed that I didn't have the idea. Like, I'd been surrounding myself now for, 5 years probably at that time with all of these entrepreneurs, but I just didn't know what I wanted to do. I'd had a few false starts and things just didn't get off the ground. So I decided my best strategy out of school would be to go work at a startup. This seems like the best natural next step. And where I decided to go was Ecobee. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they make the kind of Canadian Nest thermostat competitor. But Nest didn't even exist at the time. I give Stu a lot of credit. He had a ton of foresight on that industry. And while I was actually at Ecobee, I think the Nest launched. Which I bet was probably, in the end, when they look back, probably one of the best things that happened, because Apple got to spend a lot of money marketing their category. But I was there for about 10 months. And around that time, one of the speakers from one of the conferences I had planned, I was visiting them. And this speaker, this was back in 2010, happened to be Toby from Shopify. Wow. And he had a 25-person company that was doing this e-commerce thing. And
that was
really should have just gone and worked there, but another story. So they were launching a theme store. And the theme store was going to let anyone be able to put up a design for a store. And I thought, okay, well, I'm getting this job, but I want to do something that's like a side project or keeps me connected to what I want to be doing eventually. So I launched a theme in the theme store, but I was not a developer. So I took a little bit of my savings and I was able to convince one of my friends to build a theme for me. And I paid them to build this theme. And then the agreement was we'd also do a profit share on any of the theme sales, but I would do all of the support for the theme for anyone that had questions. And we ended up, I don't know the numbers at this point, but we made thousands of dollars off of this theme when it launched into the theme store. And I started to get really familiar with customer service and really familiar with people that were trying to launch stores. But what I noticed was that at this time in the internet, people had like their website and then they had shop.theirwebsite.com. And our theme usually powered shop.theirwebsite. And you would look at the two of these and they would look so different. They were just completely different brands, worlds. They'd obviously spent a lot of money on their primary website, and the shop was this secondary thing. And I thought that we should find a way that we could just power their existing website with e-commerce. And I started hacking away on some of the dev tools in Shopify and was trying to figure out a way that we could just embed Shopify on a website. it turned out that almost everything about Shopify made this really hard. Like no matter what you did, somehow you'd click something that went back to the store. It was very hard to architect around. So I applied to, I think it was run by Joey Davila at the time, but it was the Shopify developer program. And I was like, I want Shopify to help me find a way to avoid Shopify while doing this on someone else's website. And probably to their credit at the time, they're like, no, sorry, this is really not part of our roadmap. And I decided that I wanted to go try to figure out how I can make this happen on my own. And I ended up building some prototypes with a friend of this idea of this embeddable cart, and applied to Y Combinator. This would have been back in 2011. And I had kind of fallen in love with Y Combinator through a friend who was a Rails developer back in 2007, 2008. So I've been following them for a long time. And I was a huge fan of Jessica Livingston and Founders at Work. So very excited to apply. And this Y Combinator application went in, and I sat and I waited, and I was so excited. And we ended up not even getting an interview. And that same week, my boyfriend broke up with me. And just 3 days before we got the rejection, I had quit my job because I decided that I didn't want this application to determine whether or not I was going to do the company. I wanted that to be my decision, whether this application came back positive or not. So we got rejected. I was jobless and I was boyfriendless. And then my co-founder, who had built the prototype, said that they no longer wanted to work on it anymore. So it was this like terrible, no good, bad week. And I heard that one of the partners from Y Combinator was coming up to Waterloo. And I thought, okay, I'm going to go figure out why we got rejected. I'm going to go like try to convince them to let us in. And I remember driving down to Waterloo, getting there and just sitting in Communitech, waiting for someone to walk by that would either get me to them or that I could have a conversation. And one of my friends was like, don't worry, I'm like kind of in charge of his schedule, so I'll make sure that at some point you cross paths. And at 5 p.m., this friend walks by and they're like, sorry, he just stepped out, but don't worry, he's back tomorrow. And I'm like, I had driven down from Toronto to like just sit there all day. So I drove back to Toronto and then I drove back to Waterloo. I was not in a particularly good headspace, but this felt like the right thing to do. And when I was there the next day, I was like, there's no way I am leaving here today without talking to this guy. Like it just can't happen. And by the end of the day, I saw him like walking down the hallway as he was like leaving for the airport. And I literally just like went up to him in the hallway and was like, okay, we have to talk. And I pitched the startup there in the hallway. And he's like, I think I remember this application. Yeah, no, it was kind of interesting. Okay, yeah, like I'll call you tomorrow, but like I'll see what I can do. And the next day he called and he said, I was able to get you an interview. You're coming down to Mountain View to interview for Y Combinator. And I think that like this was a huge turning point for me for no other reason than it taught me that you can make opportunities out of dead ends. And so I ended up going down to Mountain View, actually getting my ex-co-founder now to come join again for the interview, to come down. And we just got to breathe the Silicon Valley air. And if there's anyone here that like is doing startups and hasn't had a chance to like go down to the Valley, go spend time there, I would highly, highly, highly recommend it. It's just magical. Like to sit in a coffee shop and hear everyone talking about the same things. It gets very old very quickly, but if you haven't experienced it, it was so inspiring to what we were doing. And we also, in that interview, heard about Stripe for the first time. Stripe was like months old. They were still, I think, just Patrick and John working on it. And they're like, you should work with Stripe. Stripe would be the right thing to make this idea actually function. on the website. And at the end of the day, we got rejected, which might sound like a really sad end to the story, but I had become reinvigorated by this idea, by the fact that I could make things happen. And as disappointed as I was when I came back, I had some of my friends come over for drinks. One of them in particular was Heather Payne. And Heather today runs Juneau College. She was the founder of Ladies Learning Code. We'd only known each other at the time for maybe 2 or 3 months. And she came over and I showed her this prototype, and she, on the spot, over probably too many glasses of wine, was like, I'm going to invest. I'll give you 10K. And I was like, okay, we should talk tomorrow when you have maybe sobered up a little bit. But the next day she was like, no, seriously, like I want to invest. And like, as context, this was Heather probably giving me like a third of the money she had in all her world. So it was this like massive vote of confidence for me. I don't even think I got the check for like 2 or 3 more months. And we were maybe like into Extreme Startups, which was the Toronto Accelerator by that time. But again, it wasn't actually about the thing. It was about the vote of confidence. It was about being able to create something from nothing that just gave me the energy to kind of jump from failure to failure, really. And that was kind of how I got my start as a founder, and how I really made that leap from very much wannabe for almost a decade to jumping in and doing my first thing.
Katherine, I'm so in this story. I'm like loving this. This is awesome. I love how everything like builds on top of each other. I love how you, didn't take no for an answer. I love how you just like, you kept going. And it really just, as you continue to tell the story, what I keep hearing is like, look who was in your network, right? Like, look who was in the circle around you. You know, a lot of these people were just starting their own things, right? But it's a similar type of person who's got a similar vision for, you know, what they see their life looking like. And it's just amazing to hear how that all meshed together. So for people who don't know about Y Combinator, what can you tell them? Who is it? Who is it a good fit for? Can people here apply?
Yeah, so I think Y Combinator is actually actively taking applications right now for their winter 2022 cohort. Y Combinator is the original accelerator, and probably if you've heard at some point this word accelerator or incubator, and most of them today follow exactly Y Combinator's template for how these work. So it is a 3-month program. They give you a little bit of funding. It used to be 20K. Now it's like 120K to go into this program. A lot of incubators and accelerators make you like work out of the same space as a whole bunch of other startups, but Y Combinator doesn't do that. What they do is a dinner once a week. And that might sound like not very much, but really what it's about is giving you access to really incredible entrepreneur stories once a week that can sort of help you navigate all of the things that you're going to come up against as an entrepreneur. And then it also gives you accountability. You know that by that next week, you have to get somewhere else in your startup journey in this very, very important 3-month period. And what Paul Graham says in some of his essays is, as a startup, you want to be trying to grow 10% week over week. And that's really what a lot of these startups are trying to do. Others are trying to just get their first prototype up, but it all builds up to what they call demo day. And I think demo day for the last batch actually happens this Saturday. So they do 2 batches a year. And at demo day, a whole bunch of investors come and they look at all of these startups, and the best entrepreneurs can corral that interest into people actually putting money into their startup. But Airbnb, Stripe, Dropbox, Instacart, all of these companies went through Y Combinator. And it's much, much bigger now. It's about 200 companies go through it twice a year. I think the most valuable thing about Y Combinator is the market dynamics that it create by getting all of these investors to look at your company at a very specific point in time, which is very powerful. The other thing that it actually allows you to do is have this incredible peer network, which if you're a competitive person can be quite inspiring, to try to keep up with this really amazing group of people. But I also think that peer network, both in to what you said, it's like you listen to the people that I've had the chance to, I would say, grow up with, in this startup world. You can only know looking backwards, right? Like where all of those people that you met really mattered. That's one part of it. But the other part is I think entrepreneurs need other entrepreneurs as therapy. It is a really lonely, awful experience most of the time. And it has some highs, but the lows are really, really, really low. And as much as you might try to separate yourself from your companies, it's incredibly personal. And I think, sometimes, not even sometimes, your family probably doesn't get it. Depending on who your partner is, your partner probably doesn't always get it either. But to have entrepreneurs around you, I think is almost just a necessity to survive the entrepreneurial experience, and Y Combinator can give that to you. So, I highly, highly recommend Y Combinator. It's a bit weird in a COVID world. I think it's a lot more magical when you're there in person, but I know that they're trying really, really hard, like everyone else is, to make it work in the world we are in today.
Remarkable. And I see we do have some questions in the chat, and some relate to fundraising, which we are absolutely going to get to. I know that's an area of expertise for you. But let's jump back into this company. So you got your 10K investment. This is what you'd consider to be your first business. The
first one worth talking about. I'd probably registered 4 before that, but yeah.
This is the one that built some legs. So tell us about this company.
Yeah, so ShopLocket was essentially embedded e-commerce, was the basic idea. And I ended up hiring first a contractor that was working on helping to build the actual app. That contractor I was able to convince to come join me more full time on this journey, Andrew Lewis, and he became my co-founder. We got into extreme startups, which was, it's morphed many times since. Highline Beta might actually be the current form of what extreme startups was at some point in time. And we had 3 months to get some initial traction on this and go to our demo day. And the goal was that we wanted to try to raise $1 million coming out of demo day. Why $1 million? Well, that's what everyone else was raising. Honestly, not very much thinking went into that.
Like a
and so we needed to get some amount of traction. So we had the product, we were doing a lot of press, we got some number of people applying, we had a little bit of volume moving through it, but really, I would say nothing was really working, but there was a concept, there was something that we were trying to do. And we managed to raise $1 million in financing. We actually had a couple deals fall through. I remember very vividly sitting on the patio of an Italian restaurant at Yorkdale, and we had just had a term sheet pulled, and it felt like the world had ended. We were 2 weeks away from demo day. I didn't know how we were going to get anything out of the next couple of weeks. And it was a very, very low moment for us. We put so much energy into working with that particular investment partner. And I decided I wanted to get on the plane. I needed to go down to San Francisco, and I needed to go try to find interest. And what was bizarre was that I realized every time I got on the plane and went down to San Francisco, the Canadian investors got more and more interested. It didn't actually matter what I was doing in San Francisco. It just mattered that I was not in Canada.
It's almost like marketing a little bit, right? It's almost like marketing.
It was It was 100% marketing. And I don't mean to like keep tying these stories back to ex-boyfriends, but what was actually going on is I had met my boyfriend at the time at Y Combinator interviews where I was rejected just a few months earlier. So he was going through Y Combinator. So I was flying down to Mountain View to go visit him in the program. And so it was entirely not work. I was just flying down to Mountain View every week. But every time I went down, everyone's like, whoa, she has so many follow-up meetings. She's spending so much time down in San Francisco. And it was something that I think has become like such useful information to me over the course of the like following decade was that I would say Canadian investors have an inferiority complex to US investors. And as much as Canadian investors, in my opinion, are much more conservative, they are less likely to be a lead. They're less likely to put their neck on the line early compared to a West Coast investor who I would say tend to make more of their own decisions. If they say no, I haven't found that they're usually that willing to come in after someone else leads. But Canadian investors, I think their worst nightmare is that they miss out on the company that was right under their nose. That they saw it first, they said no, and then some, grade A fund in the US picks it up and it's the success story that they look silly for having missed out on. And that dynamic was actually so much more powerful than I really realized. And I also realized that lead investors and this idea of that person that makes the first bite is so powerful to fundraising. And it's the hardest thing. Everyone wants to come in once someone has come in. And the game of fundraising, I think, is about creating the market dynamics that gets someone to say yes first. And that, like, there's certainly an aspect of business performance, but sometimes, it's not, well, not even sometimes, most of the time, it's not the best business that raises the best money at the best terms. It's the best market dynamics at the time that gets the best. And I really enjoy analyzing these stories and like being like, well, why did that company raise at that when like if I look at the metrics, like it doesn't make sense because like this company is a better company. Like I just don't really understand. And I realized, okay, like it's kind of a stupid game. Like I would like it to be that everyone just raises money because of the metrics or like the quality of the business. But I think that's also just not, I realized, probably took me 2 or 3 years of feeling really bitter to realize that might actually be a worse way for the system to work because the way that startups succeed is because of founders' passion, their ability to sell, their willingness not to give up. So is it so bad that fundraising rounds are actually based on those qualities? Yeah. They're based on how many people you'll ask, how tenacious you are, like whether you're willing to ask for what you think you deserve. And maybe that's why it's good that fundraising is not just about metrics, because if it was just about metrics, you would lose the fact that metrics aren't what get companies off the ground, it's founders. So I started to embrace the idea that the sales process of fundraising was not just important, but it also was you showing the market that you have what it takes to be an entrepreneur, because those very qualities would be what you would use to make sure, no matter what, this company succeeded. So, yeah.
Wow. I'm like writing down, you've got some incredible quotes here. I see, shout out to Natalie, who's like capturing some amazing quotes from you here. But yeah, metrics aren't what get companies off the ground, it's founders. Yeah. And I think it's funny because we search here saying, I'd love a girlfriend who flies to me regularly. I love that. But it's amazing how it's like, it's having that confidence to sort of position yourself. There are parallels to dating here, Catherine, because it's like, when other people show interest, it's almost like that option becomes a little bit more exciting now, right? It's like other people are interested in this too. The way that you positioned yourself going down, being in the place where things happen, it just creates this sort of it's a persona. Like you're really building a bit of a brand and a persona just even through that process that makes people want to take a second look at you, right? Want to go a little bit deeper. I want to dive into fundraising. Before I do, Haifa asked a question tied to something that we were chatting about that I think is a good one for where we are. Katherine, where did you find these places to connect with other entrepreneurs? Like, how did you sort of immerse yourself and find those kind of like-minded people?
I was not joking when I said I did everything. Like there were periods of my life where I was probably at 1 to 2 events every single day. Whether like there wasn't a startup event in Toronto that I didn't go to. There wasn't a meetup I didn't go to. I remember very vividly during my Shop Locket days, I think it was Shop Locket, I went to the Relay Ventures, like, I don't know, it was their AGM, I think, and they had put a small amount of money in us, but I remember being there and being so tired and really wanting to leave, but knowing that the real conversation happens after the event is over. And I was not staying at the Four Seasons where this was taking place, but I was like, okay, I just need to like hang out basically in the lobby until people come down for like their like chatting after this event. And I just need to be here while that is happening. And this is like how I ran my life. I was always thinking about like, where can I be? What should I do? Who am I going to run into? And like from very, very early, like I'd say when I was like 14, I was always reaching out to people to connect with them, to have a conversation with them. I remember my first time ever hopping on the phone with an entrepreneur who was fairly successful. And I remember I was probably 14 or 15 and my heart was racing. I was so nervous, but I threw myself into so many situations like that. And I did it again and again and again. Even through Shop Locket, I knew I needed to network in the industry that I was trying to get into, which was hardware eventually. That's where the company started focusing on these pre-order products. So I started an interview series and I interviewed over 120 hardware entrepreneurs. And we would post their interviews. I was at every hardware conference. I hosted events around the world. And yeah, like my story ends up sounding like this magical jump from here to here, but what you don't hear about is the 99 things that I did that I don't have a story to say what happened out of that. But the ones that worked, and it creates a highlight reel that sounds magical. But I was doing so much to try to have a few of those work out.
Yes. I think one thing that I know is hard for a lot of people, even extroverts, right, is like going up and approaching somebody that you don't know. Mm-hmm. Maybe you admire them, maybe you find them a bit intimidating. Like it takes a lot to kind of go up and talk to someone and not sound, you don't want to come across as like this like desperate mm-hmm. person. You want to present yourself in a good light. What are some of your best like tips on how to network the right way?
Yeah, I am probably one of the deepest introverts you could actually imagine. Like my definition of perfection would be just like hiding in a room, maybe a hotel room, and like just like being away from everyone always. But that was not a particularly great strategy to be who I wanted to be and accomplish what I wanted to do. But I hate nothing more than walking into a room that has a ton of different people. And like just having to network or be in that room. So I would say that there were a couple strategies. One, I was able to get to a point where usually in most rooms, there were 1 or 2 people that I knew. And that ended up being my safety net, but that wasn't always the case. It took me going to a lot of events over a very long period of time to get to the point where I could walk into most of these events and know someone. And oftentimes it was getting to know the person that runs the event. And then like you kind of have your safe place, That was really, really, really important to me. But you just have to be willing to like be really, really, really uncomfortable in all of the other moments, like leading up to that. And in terms of like, how do you have a good conversation with someone? You know, I could tell you that like I, you know, had these strategies and was super eloquent, but the answer is probably that I had 10,000 of them. And like now I can be thrown into almost any situation and have almost any conversation, but I highly doubt that that was me being particularly good at it or like being particularly strategic. I think I just had a lot of bad conversations. And I was that person that annoys me today that like, you know, sent the emails to like just pick someone's brain and like try to like take them out for coffee and had no purpose to it. And I was totally wasting these people's time, but they were so kind as to put up with like a very naive, very bad at having conversations version of me. And eventually, probably years later, like it looks like I maybe just like know what I'm doing, but like I had no idea. And you just figure it out through repetition. In my case, like I didn't have the magical skills that I couldn't, like I didn't just have to learn it by doing it a lot. And then the other thing, like there's one story in particular where I was doing a ton of these hardware events. I was meeting a ton of people in that industry because ShopLocket ended up realizing that embedded e-commerce for everyone like was not a great strategy. So we ended up doubling down on people that were doing pre-sales. So think people that were coming off of Kickstarter or Indiegogo. And those people had a real need. They were usually pretty high tech. They had beautiful websites. They didn't want to use Shopify, and Shopify wouldn't let them do pre-orders, meaning it wouldn't let them capture a credit card but not charge it. But we could enable that using Stripe. So I remember the very first like Stripe Connect announcement was Stripe partners with ShopLocket and Shopify. It's probably like the highlight of anything that ShopLocket ever did. And that we worked with Interaxon, we worked with Nimi when it launched, we worked with a company called Ringly, which was a really cool company at the time. And I was speaking at an event about what we were doing. I had written a book of all of these interviews, and I believe that having a prop can be very powerful. So this was this beautiful, it probably cost me $100 a book to turn all of my interviews into this gorgeous, it was designed by our designer, Mariev, who was just so incredible. It looked like a beautiful coffee table book. And I would take this everywhere with me because I could like show, hey, like we write these interviews, we work with hardware entrepreneurs, we help support them in their journey. And I was going to the opening of a hardware incubator called Highway 1. And one of my friends got me in because she's like, we were on a panel at an event, and she's like, oh, you should come along to this thing. So she dragged me along to this event, and at the event was the founder of PCH, because Highway 1 was this thing that he was launching. But the founder of PCH actually lived in Shenzhen. He didn't spend very much time in the US at all. And she had spent a little bit of time in Hong Kong, and she had gotten to know Liam in her time there. Her name's Star. She is an incredible engineer and entrepreneur herself. And she's like, you have to talk to Liam. And I was like, I don't want to. I don't have the energy. I don't like being the person that tries to talk to the most important person in the room. She's like, no, you have to. You are talking to Liam. And she basically like dragged me across the room and introduced me to Liam. And I showed him my prop, which was this book. And Liam loved this book. And he like took it and he went and he sat in the corner and he just like flipped through this book of interviews that we had put together. And he's like, I'm so sorry that we can't spend more time talking about this, but I'm flying back to Shenzhen tomorrow. And in the spirit of like doing crazy things and hoping they work out in some way, just a week earlier, I had booked a trip to Shenzhen and I had no agenda. I knew no one there. I had no meetings, but I felt like I couldn't talk about hardware. I couldn't help people bring their products to life without having been to the heart of where these things were made. So I had just booked this trip completely on a whim. And you could say, like, how does that happen? How do you have a trip to Shenzhen and someone offers you that like they're going to be in Shenzhen the next day? It's because I was doing a million things. Like, and these moments were probably bound to happen, because you want to know how many trips I took where it didn't work out this way. And I was like, well, actually, I'm going to be in Shenzhen tomorrow. So I would love to meet with you. He's like, that's fantastic. Okay, great. Like, here's my secretary. Let's meet up. I ended up knowing nothing about how to get around or do anything. I realized later that most people get like picked up at the airport by a company car and like driven from Hong Kong to Shenzhen. But I totally did this via public transit when it took about an hour and a half to get there from Hong Kong with a couple different train changes. I had never been to Asia before. I didn't realize that my phone was not going to work the second I crossed the border. I couldn't communicate with the taxi driver. All I knew is that I need to get to the Shangri-La, but I ended up at the wrong Shangri-La because there's 2 Shangri-Las in Shenzhen. And then I had to figure out how to connect to the internet there so I could call I was 5 hours late for this meeting. And he kindly still took the meeting once I got there. And honestly, the meeting went nowhere. Like, and you might say, like, wow, and then he went on to acquire the company. Like, kind of, yes. But the meeting was just a meeting. And then he wouldn't respond to my emails after the meeting. So I decided my best route was to just try to work with his secretary to try to like get the things he had mentioned. So I was like, hey, Leah mentioned I should talk to this person and this person. And eventually his secretary connected me to the right people. We started a conversation. And it was that person that it turns out was actually put in charge of building their content strategy for PCH, which was why he was so interested in this book that we had written, because they were really trying to do community building in the world of young entrepreneurs. And probably from that meeting to the point that we sold the company was 90 days, like till it closed. It was this whirlwind over the course of those next 90 days. But yeah, in terms of networking at events, as an introvert, it's hard, but I was so mission oriented. And I had a few strategies to find my safe places.
Excellent strategies. Really, really good. Wow. I think this is a great time to jump into one of the earlier questions that we had surrounding fundraising, because honestly, I mean, it's necessary. It's a necessary part for many startups, right? Especially in the tech space, to fundraise money. And it can be a very intimidating process. It's like, how does one even go about doing something like that? So the question that we have here is from Judy, who says, do you have fundraising advice for non-tech founders? My newest venture is a social enterprise in rural Rwanda.
Yeah. So I think any company can fundraise. For-profit, non-profit, doesn't matter. Anyone can fundraise. And then in the for-profit world, you can be non-tech and you can be tech. The differences are going to be your sources of capital, and then your multiple, meaning how your company is actually going to get valued. So I am going to assume, at least for now, that this enterprise is for-profit. But if it's nonprofit, put it in the comments and we can have that conversation too. But let's assume that this is a for-profit business that needs to fundraise. Being a non-tech business, like let's say there's no technology involved in your business, that business is just generally going to get valued lower than a business that is a technology business. If what you're actually saying here is that it's not a tech business, it's just that you're not a tech founder. I have been there. It is really hard to raise money for a tech business as a non-tech founder, particularly pre-product. So if you have an idea for something, you want to build it, you're a non-tech founder, and you don't want to take on a technical co-founder, my advice would be get the product to the point that it exists in the market so that you can credibly say, I don't need a technical co-founder in order to make this real. I've proven to you that I can make this real on my own. Otherwise, and this is what I experienced, I was probably going to be unable to really raise money without having a technical co-founder on ShopLocket. And I think that like with credibility and time, I think I could probably go into fields, and it's kind of what I did with Sheertex without the technical background, and still raise money. But it's a much harder road, and it requires you being very commanding in your confidence that you can actually make this product real. So my advice would be, if you're a non-tech founder, either get it to a product, meaning like I went and I took coding classes. Like I went and I like tried to learn how to build it myself so that I could get it as far as I could before I would have to bring someone else in or bring in a technical co-founder. Earlier on, it's very hard to search for a technical co-founder. More likely, you have to take years of building friends and networks to find the person that's going to really want to jump on board with you and start this. So then for actually raising money, so let's say that you are in a tech business, you are a non-tech founder, you have a prototype, and you're going out to raise, I almost always recommend, particularly to people that are raising money for the first time, that they go through an incubator of some sort. I find that for someone that has never raised money, being able to have someone that can help walk you through the terms, someone that can tell you what's market, tell you what's going on in the world, is going to be so, so helpful. And in incubators, whether it's the person that runs the incubator or whether it's the other people going through the incubator, you're just surrounded by people that can help you. A lot of people think, well, I have a lawyer, so like that can help me, but it's just not the same. And understanding the fundraising dynamics, I think incubators are so powerful to get you there. There's even incubators that take no equity these days. So you could go to, an equity-free, maybe they'll just give you money for nothing kind of incubator, but find something. Find some group that's willing to help you in those early days. And then when you're fundraising, my best advice is run a real process. Don't stumble from no to no to no to no. Decide what you're trying to raise. Pick a date that you're kicking this off and get all of your meetings into a 6-week period. And yes, it's still possible that you fail, but it is so much more likely that you succeed when people don't think that they're the only one talking to you. And this is just a negotiating tactic in general. It's the same for job hunting. It's the same for anything you're negotiating. Creating those market dynamics is really important. So sorry, that was a little meandering, but I think that's what I would recommend.
No, that's excellent. And I do want to shout out our hosts for this event, Spark Center, an innovation center based in the Durham region in Oshawa, and helping companies launch and connecting them to incredible opportunities and mentorship and advisors. And this event's also in partnership with Launch Lab, a fellow regional innovation center in Kingston. So, I mean, if those of you in the audience today are not yet a client at either of these two innovation centers, great place to start, a great place to get connected with people who can help you sort of accelerate your business. And so let's talk a little bit more about going about setting up those meetings. So are you sort of suggesting that like the right innovation center, the right incubator can help you with that? Or did you do a lot of the setting up of meetings yourself?
Yeah, so I would say do not expect that any incubator will set you up with meetings. And in fact, like they're probably very unlikely to succeed if they do. I don't say this to be mean to incubators. I'd say the exact same thing about Y Combinator. Like they can help create a dynamic in the market. They can even help give you a list of people, but it is on you to make this happen. And the best entrepreneurs, the best fundraisers I've ever known have CRMs usually with over 100 investors on that list that they have put together by talking to advisors, fellow entrepreneurs, getting those lists out of those people's heads. They've gone on Crunchbase. They've pulled lists of investors that are interested in similar spaces. They have this list. And then they go to what I would call their connectors. And your incubator might be one of your connectors. Your friend might be one of your connectors. A previous investor might be one of your connectors. You maybe only have like 5 or 10 connectors, but they're the most connected people that you know. And you sit with them and you go through your CRM and you ask them, who on this list do you know? And based on that, you kind of have, okay, like I've got 50% of the people on this list that I think I can get a warm introduction to. And then you have the other 50%. And then you basically become a private detective and you try to figure out, how do I get connected to that person? And maybe you know that they're speaking at an event, or maybe you know they invested in this company. Can you go become friends with the person that founded that company and then get an introduction through that? And the fact that you have this list, the fact that you have these connectors doesn't even mean you're going to get connected, because the double opt-in intro is basically the standard at this point in the investment community. So that person's going to email probably a forward of an email that you write. So may write a really great email. And they're going to say, hey, do you actually want to talk to this person? And then they're going to come back to you and say whether or not that person said yes. And maybe off a CRM of 100 people, you might end up with, let's say, 25 meetings that actually happen based on all of that work. And maybe 25 is not enough. Maybe you actually need a 200 person list to get there. And then off of those meetings, let's say that, 10% are willing to take a second meeting. So now you're down to maybe 5 people that are willing to take this next meeting. And then your hope is that you get one person in this that says yes at like any phase. This is your lead. This is your person willing to say yes. And that you can turn that into a whole bunch of other yeses. And even at the seed round, let's say you're raising on a safe or a convertible note, which basically means you don't really need a lead. You just need people to put in money, and they're going to get a discount on a future valuation. What I've found is that if you get a yes-ish in a meeting, particularly for anything from 10 to 50,000, which might sound like a lot, but depending on who you're talking to, it might not actually be a lot for that fund or that person. You should find the exact amount of money and then follow up immediately after, asking for the specific details, like the name of the entity, their address, like everything that you need. And you should send out the docs like that day. And you need to get them to sign, and then you follow up with their wire information. And Clerky is a wonderful tool that has like all of the like template docs from like Combinator in it. You should get your lawyer to look at it, but for probably the first $4 million that Sheertex raised, I sent out all the docs. And I sent them out like the second I got off the phone, and we just like went up, 10K, 100K, sometimes we got a 500K, but it was just immediately capturing the interest, and then getting to the point where we were going to raise $1 million. We got the first like 200K, and you can say we're 20% committed, and then you got some soft yeses, and you can say, okay, we're 80% committed. Okay, now we're oversubscribed, and it's totally a marketing effort.
Wow, there's so much to that though. There's so much to that. I love that. Yeah, you were doing the legwork, right? Like you learned things as you went. I see in the comments here, which is such a great resource, Natalie's linking to your book Funded, a great tool, a great resource for anybody who is looking to fundraise and wants to dive a bit deeper. We had a question in the chat that people have been responding to. Haresh was asking, how do you fundraise just at the idea stage before prototype? And we had Sherry, hey Sherry, who's actually the CEO of Spark Center here, was talking about how that's really hard to do in Canada, almost impossible. Investors are not so interested in funding an idea that the founder won't put their own money into. And then we have Natalie kind of responding here, friends and family, and Sherry agreeing like friends and family is kind of the only route. Do you agree? For fundraising at the idea stage?
I think at the idea stage, incubators and accelerators. If you actually need money and you don't have friends and family, which would have been the situation that I would have been in, like, yes, Heather invested, but like that was a total fluke. But if you don't have a network of people that are just able to write you checks, and I think accelerators are pretty much the only group right now that is willing to take a first-time entrepreneur with no track record and fund them based on an idea. That said, even accelerators and incubators, are pretty weary of someone that is not, like, if you are ex-Google engineer with just idea, yeah, you're probably going to be able to, even as a first-time founder, get an accelerator to write you these days, $120,000 check to go build what you want to do. As a non-technical person with just an idea, even an accelerator is incredibly unlikely to touch you. And what I would say in that case is that, like, you just need to be creative to get it off the ground. Like, you could build a Squarespace website, and you could, collect email addresses to prove that there's, 10,000 people that want this thing. You could do pre-orders for some marketing page of this platform. Like, it's all the lean startup stuff, but you don't have to be technical to get an idea off the ground. You could even do the completely non-technical version of it, like go do door-to-door sales of something, prove that there's a market for whatever it is that you want to do. And then I think, like, whether it's an accelerator or someone else, like, people just want to know that this is not air that they're investing in. Yeah.
Excellent. Wow. I mean, Katherine, I feel like we could chat for another couple hours here. I am mindful of our timing, but I mean, we got to jump into Sheertex. I mean, the logo is floating above you. I love this new hop-in setup here. By the way, like, we're getting like comments, added here. This is the real deal right now. Talk to us, if you could kind of paint for us. I know there's so much to go into, but even like a couple minutes summary of, from idea, like, when did the idea hit you to how did you get it off the ground?
Yeah, so I had sold ShopLocket. I had started doing some angel investing. I'd angel invested in maybe 7 or 8 companies, started female funders to help people raise money and to help people invest. But then quickly realized that I was more of a builder. Like, I enjoyed the community work, but I really just wanted to get back on the other side of things. So I sold, but I think sold is a strong word in the context of female funders. Gave female funders to Highline Beta to continue the mission of what we were doing with female funders, and then really set my sights on what am I going to do next. And I will admit that it was like an incredibly depressed period of my life. Like, I had this success with ShopLocket, but it didn't feel real. It's like we were maybe scratching the surface of something that was interesting, but we didn't really get to product market fit. We didn't get to profitability. I felt like a fraud. Like, yes, I'd created this thing, and yes, I had done well off of it, and yes, like, it was interesting, but I felt hollow. And I was really afraid that I was never going to be able to do anything ever again that was worth talking about. And I put a lot of pressure on what the next idea was going to be because I was just so insecure. And I remember having a couple false starts, starting a couple partnerships, having it fall apart. And this would have been in the end of 2016, fell into this like 2-month Hallmark watching hole around Christmas. Like, I just couldn't find the energy to do anything. And it was getting towards Christmas, and my husband came to me and was like, this has been like a nice little 8-week Hallmark binge. But like, it's Christmas, like, come, the first or second week of January, you're going to like get up and you're going to do something. I don't care what you do, but you're going to do something. You're going to wake up every day and you're going to sit at a computer and do something. And he gave me 2 weeks warning. It was very kind of him. But it was probably like one of the nicest things that he could have done. And starting at the beginning of January, I got up and I went to a coffee shop. And I just started sitting at my computer again and trying to think about what it was I wanted to do. And I had, at the time, thought that I was going to do a real estate technology company because I just bought my first house. And I had just a bunch of different ideas around real estate. And I started doing my real estate license, of all things. And I even passed my first of, I think there's like 6 tests to become a real estate agent. I did the first one. But while that was all happening, I had one of those moments that I think happens to everyone, every couple of days where someone asks a question, you take out your phone, you Google to figure out what the answer is. And the question was, why do tights rip? And I was like, that's a great question. Why do tights rip? This seems kind of stupid. And I pulled up my phone and there was no clear answer on Google. And it just sent me down this rabbit hole. I started watching videos and like, well, how are tights made? And then I started reading patents around tights. And then I found myself on Alibaba. And the next thing I knew, I woke up 4 weeks later in a room surrounded by spools of fiber. And I was still working on this real estate thing, but like I had ordered so many samples of all of these random things because I was so curious about why this didn't exist. And I called up Sheena Repath, who was my only friend that knew anything about fashion. And I was like, I took her out for coffee and I was like, okay, am I crazy? Like, is no one working on this? Like, why, like, what is this? Why is unbreakable pantyhose? Why is the idea of pantyhose that don't rip? Why is this not something that is either solved or being actively worked on? And she had been in fashion innovation for a long time. She's like, I have worked in this industry for 20 years and like no one has asked me that question. And with that, I was just like, okay, I'm going to go down this path and just figure out what's there. And I had a really basic hypothesis that if you could just get stronger fiber, you could make stronger tights. Really, really simple. And I ordered all of these spools and my test was, can you wrap the thread around your finger and pull it? If it breaks, that is probably going to make breakable tights. If you can wrap your finger around and pull it and it doesn't break, that's probably going to make good tights. And I probably had 100 spools of things that came that I just snapped it, like the second I tried. And then one day a fiber showed up that I went like this and I pulled it and I was more likely to cut my finger off than actually break this fiber. And that fiber cost me, I think, $2,000 for this one spool. And this was like a little bit desperation, but also just like, okay, come on, something in the world has to work. And it was probably 3 times too thick to make regular sheer hosiery, but it was just sheer enough that you could call the thing that it made tights. So I was like, okay, that's good enough. And I took this spool after it passed that test and I shipped it to a random factory, like in China, off like one of these random sites of places that will make things for you. Didn't tell them what fiber I was shipping them. Just said, throw this on a machine. Like, just, I don't know, tell me what happens. And they ended up sending back a really angry note saying, this broke the machine. This did not work. We managed to hack off this tiny piece, but like, please don't talk to us again. And I was so curious to see what was going to arrive. And it was supposed to arrive on a Friday. And then I got a notification from FedEx that it wasn't going to arrive till Monday. And I was just like, I can't wait. I just can't wait. So I called FedEx. I drove 2 hours. And I met the truck so that I could like get this sample off the truck. And I remember sitting in the parking lot, pulling this sample out. And it was so incredibly strong. Like there was nothing I could do that could break this, which compared to every other prototype that I had made in the previous 5 months, which were just like terrible. I could rip them in a second. This was incredible. but it was white. It was too thick. It had no stretch to it. And it broke the machines we tried to make it on. But for some reason, my brain just like pushed out all of those problems and was like, this is it. And I gave up the whole real estate thing kind of in that moment, and decided I was going to figure out how to solve these problems. And I assumed that it was going to be so easy for me to raise money and like, this is going to be great. Like I had already raised lots of money. I had already had a successful exit. But it turns out when you take a white piece of cheesecloth to investor meetings, they don't go particularly well. And I had set up a whole bunch of these meetings with just people that I knew that were investors, mostly angel investors. And they all looked at me like I was absolutely insane. And what I ended up having to do was basically ask the like 4 or 5 people who were at this point just friends. I was like, oh, and I was like going through the pitch and you could see them kind of like glazing over and being like, yeah, it's not going to work. And I'm like, okay, I just need you to write a 10K check. Like, I need you to do this so that other people will do this. And that sales pitch worked much better than actually trying to get them to believe that this thing was going to turn into beautiful unbreakable pantyhose. But these few people, and this was Heather Payne again, this was Michelle Romano, this was Nicole Verkin, this was Alyssa Furtado, this was Lauren Haw, all fellow entrepreneurs that we'd kind of grown up together in our last startups, wrote these first checks. And then now I could say I have all these other investors, other people started piling on. And I think we raised about $250,000 in this phase of the company. And that was enough to let me basically buy more fiber so that I could continue this testing. And by the end of that summer, after me spending, no one took me seriously. No one wanted to sell me anything. I think I had to call the fiber suppliers, all of the different fiber suppliers, like twice a week, and eventually like got to the people that were willing to maybe make something possible. And by the end of the summer, we had something that looked slightly closer to pantyhose, but like really not great. And that's what I like had this like vendetta I needed to apply to Y Combinator again. So I applied to Y Combinator about this time, 4 years ago. And this time got an interview, this time got in. And for me, that was, well, for Sheertex, I think that was a really defining moment because Sheertex could have so easily been relegated to fashion company. And Sheertex needed to be considered a tech company. It needed to be considered a tech company because it had to be able to raise a lot of money. And it had to be able to raise a lot of money with almost no metrics. For quite a long time, I'd say like Sheertex still needs the ability to raise money as a tech company, not as just an e-com company, in order to make the investments that we have to make. And Y Combinator was that stamp that we could put on the company that kind of validated that this was a tech company. And I thought that we were going to be able to launch, 6 months after I got that first prototype. Turns out it took us 2 years to get through all of the other phases of trying to make this product. And eventually we set up our own factory in Muskoka, of all places, because I had this like idyllic dream that I could have this factory in the middle of nowhere and it would be so perfect and wonderful. And it worked for like a minute until we realized that this undyeable fiber had to be combined with dyeable fibers, meaning you needed a dye house. And imagine trying to get the permits to start a dye house in Muskoka. Like that's very, very problematic. So I was on a plane probably twice a week, headed to Montreal to get access to a dye house so that we could dye what we made, bring it back to Muskoka to be able to ship it out to customers. We also realized that our cost to make this product was so high. I think in the early days, it probably cost me $300 a pair. Our fiber, was probably 2 times more expensive than silver on a weight for weight basis. And we needed to make a lot of this product to bring that cost down. And I had hired every person that had ever sewn in Muskoka to work at this little factory. And I was bringing in knitting technicians from Montreal on contract every weekend to try to get this to work. But it just became so clear that we would not be able to scale in Muskoka. There were just too many problems. And I remember in that moment in May of, I think it was 2019, realizing we had to move. And we made the decision that we would move the company to Montreal. And this is where the stars kind of aligned. We had one of our consultants who mentioned to me that the largest hosiery factory in Canada was shutting down. They were offshoring all of their production, and they probably had a couple of machines available, so we could get some machines and then go set up our own factory. And I remember going to, I think it was Barcelona at the time, to a big knitting conference to meet with this person who was selling some of these machines. And I looked at the list of machines and I was like, well, what if we just bought everything? Like, what would happen if we just bought it all? And this was kind of one of my crazier things that I think I ever did. But we ended up going from what was a 2,000 square foot factory that we had kind of taken over all the adjacent warehouse space. Maybe we'd expanded to like 10,000 square feet in those 6 months, and going overnight to 115,000 square foot factory. From the first day I walked into the factory to the day we took it over was about 6 weeks. We were in the midst of closing a Series A, but we hadn't actually closed the round yet. So I actually signed all the paperwork before we really even had the money. And I was basically taking half the money from the Series A before the close date on convertible notes to try to make it work with the new factory we were taking over. And this brings us to September 2019. And I'm now sitting in this gigantic factory with 10 people that we had brought from Muskoka to Montreal, and realizing that, back of the napkin, we had to grow 20x in 6 weeks to make this building make any sense for what we were doing. And that became the mission. We grew from those 10 people to about 120 people in about 60 days. Wow. We grew from about 170,000 in monthly sales to 2 million in monthly sales in the same 60 days. We went from making probably 3,000 pairs a month to 40,000 pairs a month. It was the craziest time in my life. And at this same time, I had basically in August told my husband, by the way, I'm buying a factory in Montreal. I'm going to be there. And he's like, are we moving to Montreal? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to be there though. So I was living in a hotel for 3 months in Montreal, leaving the hotel at 6 a.m, getting home at midnight. It was just complete insanity. And then I had to go out and fundraise. And I remember being I don't even know how we're going to hold this together while I'm fundraising. And I ended up calling up my husband, who at the time had sold his company and was figuring out what he wanted to do next. And I'm like, you just have to come here tomorrow and you have to babysit the company. I need to go to New York and I have to go fundraising, but I don't know how we're going to ship our Black Friday orders if I go there. So you just need to show up tomorrow. So he came to the factory as I walked out the door. And just I was like, take it. I don't know, figure it out. And so he became in that moment our COO and is still with the company today.
Wow.
And we ended up closing our Series B within that 4-week period. We raised about 30 million. Today we've raised about 58 million in capital. And then I was really excited that we'd raised this money and we were going to get a chance to breathe. We were going to get a chance to maybe hire some management, because 120 people reported to 3 people, and that was bad for everyone. And then 60 days after that round, COVID hit. And Montreal or Quebec was the only jurisdiction in all of North America that ever shut down manufacturing. So we were shut down for 3 months, and we are in a category that, like, who buys tights? Like, in the summer during COVID, when they're not going to restaurants, they're not going to work. And we did not know what to do. Do you pack up shop? Do you try again? Like, what do you do? And we just decided to double down and just try it and just go out in fall of 2020 and see what happens. And we were amazed. There was a market there. There were people willing to buy tights. And honestly, I still don't really understand it, but I think that the best explanation is that tights are more of a staple than we ever expected. When it's cold, if you ever want to wear a dress, you probably need a pair of tights. And because of the nature of this category, you probably don't have the ones you bought last year. And even if the market overall is suppressed 99%, that remaining part of the market moved online. People weren't going to drugstores and department stores. And that's what allowed us to keep the company going. And we managed to go from about 5 million in that first year in 2019 to about 11 million in sales last year. And this year, we should hit about 30 million. And I still think that we're operating in a heavily suppressed market. That on the other side of this, where people, return to work in some capacity, I think there's, huge opportunity on the other side. But the ultimate goal for Sheertex is to replace all of hosiery. I believe that what we produce in this technology is going to become the Kleenex of this industry. And I think that a decade from now, people will barely remember a world where tights ripped. And that's what we're on a mission to do.
I know you can't hear the whole auditorium of people who are listening virtually right now, but I'm quite sure everybody is clapping. Wow. On so many levels. Wow, Katherine. Like this conversation has been just so real, so inspiring. Like, I mean, I just love the way that you do life. I just love it. I love your attitude. I love your determination. I just think it's very clear you put your head down, and to Sherry's point, you hustle. And I just, like, I'm so proud. Like, this is a remarkable story. I believe I'm correct in saying, raising 58 million in capital, and I know you've raised money previously to that for other businesses. You're one of the most funded women in Canada. Is that not true?
Yeah, I think that would be true these days. Yeah.
That is absolutely an incredible achievement. And I love it too, because I mean, oftentimes there's a conversation, I've talked about this, previously, but there's this idea that perhaps you have to ask for what you want. And perhaps women in particular struggle with that. And there's many reasons for why that might be. But to see you kind of going out there, asking for big things and making big things happen. Like, this is a true Canadian, not just Canadian, but this is like a successful entrepreneur journey that, like, we're just so grateful to be getting a chance to hear all the inside scoop from you at this stage, because I know that this is just the beginning of where you're going and where Sheertex is going. So, I mean, on behalf of everyone here, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Amazing. So where can people connect with you? They can connect with you at Katherine Homuth. Hey, you're back. Where can people connect with you outside of today's chat?
So at Katherine Homuth on Instagram is probably the best place to find me. And you can DM me there or chat with me in the comments.
Fantastic. I also want to just plug Katherine's book again. Funded: The Entrepreneur's Guide to Raising Your First Round. You can pick it up on Amazon. I mean, take advantage of that opportunity to reach out to Katherine with any questions, because this truly, she's a wealth of knowledge here for us. Thank you all for joining today's very special Startup Grind. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. It really just makes this event so much more meaningful. Katherine had the fire behind her, the fireplace, so it really was a fireside chat today. Thank you to Spark Center for hosting this event in partnership with Launch Lab. Thank you to all of the elite partners. I want to promote the next upcoming event. Spark Center also puts out a quarterly publication. If you're not already getting a copy of this, it's called The Spark, and their fall 2021 issue, Planes, Trains, Automobiles, and Boats, will feature entrepreneurs, innovators, and businesses that are breaking new ground and driving us one step closer to the future. Visit the website in the comments to subscribe for the issue, and stay tuned for details about our next Startup Grind event on September 30th, as we sit down with some of the companies featured in the fall issue. Thank you so much again to everyone. Katherine, thank you one last time. This has truly been such an inspiring way to start the day.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks everyone for being here today. But yeah, follow me and ask me any questions you have as follow-up, because I'd love to chat.
Amazing. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.